Yes.
All right.
We're recording.
I think we're recording. Cool. So this might be posted up later on.
That would be really helpful. I know there's people that would like to see it.
Yeah, I think so too. Not everybody can make it this evening, so. Well, my name is Angela Dawn Hershey, and I am the founder of New Dawn Comfort Care, which we are I'm hosting this event under. And many people are usually asked, I get the question of, what got you into this work as an end-of-life doula and working in end-of-life care. So just wanted to kind of share with that with you guys. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and my earth-based family is on the small side. My biological parents split when I was 4 years old, and I was the only child from my biological parents. My mother struggled with mental illness things. She had PTSD, some traumatic experiences as a child, which eventually manifested into like multiple personality disorder or DID. And the reason I share that is because it gives context that I understand complicated family dynamics between, in my case, between a daughter and their mother. And I think that experience has kind of helped me in my ability to serve other daughters and siblings who might have, or even just any family dynamic issues, is just kind of going through that on my own. Eventually, she remarried to my stepfather, and she wanted to have another child. She struggled to get pregnant. She underwent some fertility treatments, things like that. She had one pregnancy loss, which was really difficult. And eventually she gave birth to my younger brother, Max, who is, he was born with a lot of complications. He was basically in complete renal failure. He was premature. And he was in and out of hospitals for the first 3 years of his life. He was on dialysis at home. We had 24/7 nursing help for him. He was tube fed. And my mom eventually donated her kidney to him, which was made a huge improvement in his quality of life, and things did improve, but also very challenging, dealing with having a child with disabilities. And then he was diagnosed with autism when he was about 3 years old, around that same time of his kidney transplant. Then when I was in high school and Max was about 5, our mom was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of small cell lung cancer. And my dad is here today, and he was with my mom at that doctor's visit when she got diagnosed. And basically, from my understanding, and he can vouch for that, was that when they gave her the bad news that Mrs. her last name was Bada at the time, you have cancer, and then basically walked out of the room without really any guidance. There was no referral to a social worker. There was no, we're going to set you up with a specialist, don't worry, we're going to take care of you. There was really no sense of support that was given. It was kind of like, call your primary care doctor and good luck. So yeah, that kind of set the stage for what the whole experience was going to be like. She went through chemo and radiation, and she went through a short period of remission around the holidays of 2004, which was the year I graduated high school. And then in the spring of 2005, the cancer returned into her spine, and usually when the cancer comes back in the spine, it's a very poor prognosis. Things aren't looking very good at that point. She tried to go through the treatments again, and they really wore her body down significantly. She was in and out of the ER for uncontrolled pain, uncontrolled nausea. And I don't think really any of us knew what questions we were supposed to be asking. And we really weren't getting any sort of real guidance. Nobody told us about palliative care. We had no idea what that was. We had no information about hospice or comfort care. And I don't exactly know how I knew how to advocate for her. I think it was really more frustration and just seeing her suffering that I just wasn't able to tolerate anymore. I wasn't able to tolerate how much she was suffering. And that's what made me start to advocate and stand up for her. So I demanded comfort care. I demanded hospice, even though I barely knew what it was. I was 19 years old. And I remember going home one day, she was still in the ER. And well, they actually discharged her. At one point, I remember calling up to the hospital and I checked to check on her and they said, oh, she's doing well because she had a few bites of a lean cuisine. And in their definition of doing better, that's because she took a few bites of a lean cuisine, she was doing better. So they were ready to discharge her home. Okay, so us again, not knowing what questions to ask, just kind of went along with it. And my stepdad brought her home and basically had to carry her up the stairs. Like she was dying. So I took one look at her and I thought, there's no way. We have no idea how to take care of her. We have no resources. They didn't send us home with any hospice or information. And so my little brother was home and he knew she was coming home. So he was very excited to spend time with her. So that was the last time that they spent time together. And I had to make that very, very difficult decision in that moment to bring her back to the ER. From there, that was kind of where I basically went home and looked up hospice in the phone book. And they came and did her admission from there. And she went to this really beautiful facility called the Hospice of the Western Reserve in Cleveland, Ohio, which is right on Lake Erie. And it's a very beautiful inpatient facility. And she spent the rest of her 14 days there on hospice until she passed away. And really those 14 days we spent trying to heal years of wounds that take a really long time. And that's something that I still to this day, I've been learning a lot about healing through ancestral healing, not even having that person around in the present tense, but that there is a way that we can continue those relationships after that person is no longer here. And that's been very helpful for me. So my 20s were me basically flailing and not really sure what I was supposed to be doing with my life. I tried a couple of different things. I went to school for real estate. I eventually started working in the dental field. And so I did that for about 6 years. And so I was sort of loosely in medical care. I enjoyed the scheduling and the patient care and things like that. And then in 2014, kind of rewind a little bit, basically through the 20s, my little brother ended up going into foster care. His biological father was really no longer able to take care of him the way that he needed. He's medically fragile. So again, I had to advocate to make sure that he got into a safe environment. And so I know that eventually when we chat with our elder law attorney this evening, I do want us to kind of touch on how that could be avoided. Situations like that. And sometimes they can't be. I don't honestly think that in our situation that necessarily could have been avoided, because at the time that was his dad and that's who the next of kin was to take care of him. But sometimes there are other things that we can do to plan better for that. And it really struck me at that time when my brother was in foster care that his teachers would sometimes ask me, and I'm like barely 23 now, they would ask if I was going to adopt my medically fragile brother. And I think this was when I was making, I don't know, $10 an hour, $12 an hour. So I didn't have those type of resources to do that. And it made me feel terrible that I couldn't, when you get a response like that from older folks. So there's so many situations that came up that were pretty much atrocious. And a lot of this, I'm just giving you my background because I've lived this. Like, this really happened. I'm not making this up, guys. So when he was in a safe situation, and he eventually did get adopted, and the family is amazing. I still have a very close relationship with my brother. He's doing very well. And he actually survived cancer in 2019. He went through his own cancer journey. He had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, huge tumor in his abdomen. So when I moved to Indy in 2014, I moved because of a relationship at the time that I was in. And I started applying for jobs here. And at the time, the dental field had sort of reached like this glass ceiling for me. There really wasn't much place to go. And I found this job working for a non-medical home care company that helped seniors stay at home, stay safe in their homes. And we would hire CNAs and home health aides to help keep these seniors at home. And I really loved that work. It was really eye-opening for me because I had no idea that service even existed. And I remember when I learned about this and I worked for this agency, I really got that aha moment of like, oh my gosh, it would have been so amazing if we would have had these tools and these resources when we really needed them. And I didn't come from that background of working in elder care. This was all new to me at the time. So coming into that industry as an outside layperson, I was like, everybody needs to know this exists. People need to know about this. So it really kind of lit my flame from that moment on that I want to know everything there is to know about these types of care resources. From there, I actually got recruited to work for hospice. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's a huge synchronicity that I got that opportunity because marketing was not my background. It wasn't something I went to, college for. Somebody in my industry sort of got to know me, knew my story, and said, "Hey, I think you'd be really good for this position." And I was basically taken under the wing by a mentor who taught me everything about the, hospice Medicare benefit. And I would go around and do education and basically marketing and sales to physicians' offices, assisted livings, nursing homes, oncology offices about how to identify a hospice appropriate patient, when is the right time to kind of get hospice involved. And it was striking to me how little doctors know about hospice. I think we're getting better about that, but it took a lot. It took a lot of grunt work really to get that education out there. And then when I would get a referral from those providers, I would sit down with the family and educate them about the hospice benefit and how it could support them at home and be a benefit to them and their loved ones. And I liked that aspect of education. I liked that aspect of providing the information for the family so they could make an informed choice. That's what it was always about, for me anyway. But when you're working for somebody else, you're held to certain expectations of meeting goals. Hospice is a a big business, and they, we call, it's known as the death trade. It is business. So we're held accountable to meet certain goals and expectations. And if you didn't meet those goals, then you ended up having a manager ride around in your car with you to figure out what you're not doing right or why you're not selling hard enough. So I didn't like that part. So I got out of that, and I worked for a short time in a geriatric psych hospital as well. So I actually had experience working with dementia patients, Alzheimer's patients, and elderly clients that had suicidal thoughts and ideations. And the questions that I was asking when I worked for that hospital was, when do we see that as a suicidal ideation versus like, when are we going to stop treating them so aggressively and maybe transition them to more comfort measures and end of life? And my questions went totally unanswered. Shocker. So shocked, because that's not the business they were in. So again, being very unsatisfied with that realization, I've always been into like holistic health through my journey of finding spirituality, that kind of stuff. So that sort of took me into going to massage school. And I knew that I wanted to help support patients on a more intimate, personal level, to bring them comfort in some way, to reduce suffering, reducing pain, anxiety, addressing some of the psychosocial aspects of, and issues around death and dying that are very hard to treat with pills. So coming from a non-pharmacological standpoint, through massage therapy was the first way for me to do that. And I've been contracting with several hospice agencies across Indy to offer hospice massage therapy for the last few years. And that's been really amazing that I've been able to do that. And then about a year and a half ago, I learned this term of end-of-life doula, and had to know everything that there was to know about it. Because as soon as I heard that, I was like, I don't know everything about what that is, but I have to know everything there is to know about that, because it just resonated with me so deeply. So basically, an end-of-life doula is a non-medical support person that supports the patient and the family through the whole end-of-life journey. We're totally non-medical. We don't administer medications or do anything like that. We do work with hospice and other providers as part of the team, and primarily with the patient and sometimes the family, on making sure that their end of life is as good as we can possibly make it. So we're sort of this liaison between the healthcare system, the end of life hospice provider, and even into death care, and helping support them in that way too. So I know that was a lot, but I appreciate you guys listening to sort of my background story, and I appreciate you holding the space for me to share all that. So,
Angela, you put it together very nice. That was
thanks, Dad.
phenomenally done. Really, actually, I'm really impressed. The way the events unfolded is exactly how it happened. I'm thinking of everything myself. Well done, Angela.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Thanks, Dad. So I want to open it up to the floor here. Is there any thoughts you guys are having? Any questions? I know I've done a lot of talking, so.
I have one question.
Yeah.
A few months ago, I got very sick. As you know, I was going to go in for surgery, and it wasn't exactly a pleasant thing. But sometimes this is kind of hard to talk about, one's demise at the end. But I guess what I'm trying to get to is obviously you're in Indianapolis and everything is going pretty good for you. The people that you've talked to, I mean, are people just sort of never thought of this or fearful or anything? This is what I like to know. I've been thinking about a lot of things, and of course, today I don't know how the other attendees feel. But, it's something that's sort of mind-boggling what to expect, and is anybody else fearful a little bit or somewhat? Nobody's getting out of here alive, as they say. But, and I don't know if that makes any sense. I guess maybe people are afraid about this type of thing. So I don't know. Have you found that out with other people you've talked to?
Yeah. I think, and I just, with, especially because of this last year, I think has brought death and dying a little closer to everyone, regardless of your age. We're living in a pandemic time.
And that's another time for
And
old folks a little bit here. And
I think even more so, we're no longer exempt just because, I'm 34 and relatively healthy, which I am, but there are people contracting this virus and ending up in the ICU who eventually have to even consider some of these things. So, like you said, none of us are getting out of here alive. But how do we, my whole thing is sometimes shifting that. I'm just admitting somebody here. That's why I'm a little distracted. Is it so scary to think about our death, and like what makes that so scary? For me, what made that experience traumatic and scary was the lack of support. It was the lack of education, the lack of skills, the lack of, and I think a lot of lack of is what makes death scary. But I don't think it has to be that way. And that's really the sort of the platform I stand on, is how do we shift that thinking into thinking of it more as a rite of passage. We celebrate.
sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
With all the people that are online here today, we talked briefly, you mentioned briefly about when I was with your mom when she finally got the news.
Mm-hmm.
It was dumbfounding when the doctor came in, dropped this huge bomb on your lap, and just casually, nonchalantly walked away. And we waited there for a little while, in fact, a half hour, thinking maybe a nurse would come in or somebody would come in and sort of, And I remember your mom, when she looked at me, her jaw was sort of dropped, and she looked at me. Did he say what I thought he said? And I said, yeah. He goes, I guess he told me I'm
Bleeped.
yeah, screwed, yeah.
Effed.
And that was the exact word she said. And we waited, and then of course we left. And then she had to tell, of course, Tony, because she's married to Tony. But I just happened to be there. But that's all that was ever done. And then after that, as scary as it was, you're on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really proud that you're doing this. I'm learning a lot just by listening to this and knowing that there's a bunch of people here also.
Yeah. Well, I try to be, for other people is really what I wish I would have had in that situation. And so I just think it's important to hold a space for these conversations, because I think the narrative is that we hear in society is that, yes, death is the number one fear. It is in some ways. I think people are afraid of it. I don't know if we're necessarily afraid of dying as much as we're afraid of having suffering. I think nobody wants to suffer. And I think that's really where the fear comes from. So, but I think, like here in this little workbook, I have a little fun fact that when surveyed, 90% of people actually do want to talk about end of life. I mean, I think most people want to have these conversations. I think the narrative is that nobody wants to talk about it, but the truth is that we're not really creating spaces for these conversations. So that's something that I'm trying to change and make it so that, hey, let's gather in a non-threatening type, relaxed atmosphere and just shed some light on these conversations that are usually like, we just don't have places to talk about this stuff. Usually until you're in a very stressful situation. So trying to do some pre-planning. I think like in our situation, we did a lot of pre-planning before you were supposed to have heart surgery in the summertime. And it was hard to talk about. And I think just recognizing that, yeah, this is going to be hard. And I remember, kind of setting the stage for that talk. It was, you might cry.
Especially all the paperwork.
The paperwork took us hours to get through.
It was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it's not a walk in the park, but once it's like finally done, I for one can say that I feel so much better knowing that it's done. That it's like, and it's such a gift that you've given me now to know that those things are mostly in place, enough that I at least have an idea. But when we have no idea of what that person would want and want, that's really when the burden is placed on the family to make those decisions. And that's sort of the situation that I was put in with Mom. But, when you're 45, you don't think about, I'm going to die in, 6 months or a year. She was 45 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, she wasn't 85. So, but that's again why these conversations are important, because I think honestly, everybody over the age of 18 should really be thinking about this. And now that, especially because we're in a pandemic world, I mean, death is closer to us. The realization of it is a little bit more in our awareness now. And I think people want to have these conversations.
May I say something?
Please, yeah.
As a healthcare provider and a nurse practitioner, I've had those conversations with patients before. And I want to say that I don't know anything about the doctor that you saw, because my first thought was, where is this hospital? Because I was very appalled.
Cleveland Clinic, Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah, I have to say that they really are just now having training in medical school and nursing school to have those tough conversations. So a lot of providers don't know how, a lot of them that aren't trained in this area don't know how to convey that information. So I want you to hear that, because it wasn't, an attack against you or your family. And I'm not saying that you thought it was, but I want you to understand, and everybody understand it. Sometimes providers don't know what to say because they're human too. And again, I'm not defending that behavior, because that was really appalling. Just let you sit there. I don't understand that. But having had to have that conversation with someone and tell him that his cancer that he had never really addressed in the first place has now spread, and that he was going to die, was difficult. And it was difficult for him to hear. But fortunately, I had the hospice nurse with me so that we can tell him together. And we waited for him to process the information. Mm-hmm. So that's the important piece. And so, I was able to say, do you understand what I'm telling you? And then I actually use the words, do you understand this is going to kill you and you're going to die?
Wow.
And that's when he understood exactly what was happening. And that's when the release happened and he started to cry. So having had to do that and hold his hand while he cried was rewarding for me, because I was able to help him through that process. And then the hospice company was very great, and they were able to help him make amends with his family, because he had been estranged from most of his family, by getting a family reunion together for him, so he can say goodbye to all of his family. So I just want to throw that out there, that there is hope, and that as a clinician, we are getting better at recognizing that. But I'll be honest with you, a lot of this is not really taught in training. And so what we do here is very important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've had multiple physicians tell me that they never took palliative. Palliative was an elective. It was not in the mandatory core courses that they took. So, and only in recent years has palliative.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they aren't trained palliative. They're trained forward.
Right.
Exactly. And fortunately for me, I worked in hospice previously, so I was able to see it, know what to do. But a lot of them aren't comfortable with those conversations, and telling people bad news is tough.
There is a book out there called Being Mortal that's actually that's written by a doctor that I don't know, it's really informative. It doesn't matter where you are, what your background is, but it's a doctor and his learning and then unlearning about how as a doctor you're taught to treat and to fix and to offer all these options and to what end. But it specifically looks at as people age, and even down to, you know, assisted living was not supposed to be this weird in between of here we are in your own home, here we are in assisted living, here we are in nursing home care. Assisted living was actually meant to be an alternative, another way other than a nursing home outside of the institutionalized setting, to be able for people to live their lives on their own terms, as opposed to, okay, you get up, you eat, you take your medicine, you go here, you go to activities, having more of a regimented schedule. So that book is really, really eye-opening in more than one way. But I think too, you know, I think it's wonderful that doctors are starting to have these conversations more and look more at their blind spots. I think too, I don't know, Angela, if I'd shared this with you or not, because we've chatted more than once, but one of my good friends here in Indianapolis when we were in college, I think we were sophomores, and she was diagnosed with a terminal illness. She's since in remission, but she had a very similar experience here in this city of a doctor walking in and saying, here's a living will and here's this document, and you have about 6 months. So you should start getting your affairs in order. And she was 23 when this happened, sitting in a hospital room by herself, having to process this. So I think it's sad, but I also think the reality of saying that out loud and recognizing that this is happening and being willing to talk about, you know, we all will die. You are dying, and saying those names is really where we are able to name what it is and look at it more clearly, as opposed to, you know, I understand that, you know, transitioning sounds a lot better than dying. And at the same time, it is truly what it is. So I don't know. I think I was kind of thinking back to what you were sharing too, Angela, earlier about, you know, what is it that is, what makes it so difficult to talk about? And I was kind of sitting with that I think that the trouble for me as a person, you know, and this pandemic adds a whole nother layer is, you know, will I be by myself, but, you know, thinking to my friend who had that experience, will the people I be with be warm and supportive, or will they be cold and distant and separate and medicalize me as opposed to a real person? And I think those are two very different experiences. Maybe I wouldn't be alone per se, but I could certainly feel the weight of being lonely in a sense of strictly being in a medicalized system, seen as this patient by this window in this room on this floor, as opposed to, you know, this is Katie, these are things she likes, this is what she loves to eat, here's how to make her laugh, those things.
I think that's why you need an advocate, you know, to help.
Right, yeah.
Help you. End of life doula.
Without an advocate.
And that's where an end of life doula can come into play, because they can be that advocate and that navigator for you. and to also be present and be with you.
I mean, I
with
do
this,
have,
all these.
I have my advocates picked out already. They know who they are, and they're actually girlfriends, but, and it's nothing to take away from my husband, but I think that they stand a little further apart to make it a more non-judgmental type thing.
Non-biased.
And they'll help him and they'll help me at the same time. So
Definitely.
You should probably get me up to speed on that one of these days. We'll have another meeting on that.
I think you know who they are.
She only knows two people. So it's gotta be-
But and
Oh, that's good to know.
Angela will be, you know, directing the show. So
That's right.
And you know, if you have your documents in place, you also need to review those annually.
you know, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
I have often thought for myself that the last thing that I want to be thinking of as I'm dying, whether it be laying on the floor because of whatever, or in a hospital bed, is, oh my God, is everything done? Because I don't want to leave the kids with a mess, you know? And really, I think no matter what happens after that, for myself, no matter what happens after that, I will feel more secure. And all I want to think about is the love that I have for my family when I'm done. Not paperwork.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, you know, this is just a simplistic guide that I sort of created that I just kind of wanted us to like loosely follow, but it gets you thinking about some of this stuff.
This is,
Oh yeah.
you know, we sort of do plan for death. I don't know how many of you have children, but I remember a couple who was living here who had no family here and had children asked my husband and I to accept the responsibility of adopting their children if anything happened to them when they were flying somewhere or something, which we did, but nothing ever happened to them. But that's a way of planning for
Right.
death too. And so when you're older, you should sit down and talk to your family. Yeah, just because you could fall off a bridge. You could, you know, be in a car crash, bam, and not your
Right.
fault anytime. So it's good to have all
I
that.
don't think there's enough awareness. We assume that we're gonna live forever. We don't want to go.
Yeah, we all think we're going to live forever.
Darn it, I'm not going anywhere.
Modern medicine has sort of made dying optional.
That's true.
If you think about it, I mean,
Yeah, really.
people can live on breathing machines and feeding tubes for months or years.
Yeah, forget it.
Yeah, that's,
No, thank you.
No.
yeah, no.
Angela.
Question that I wanted to propose is, like, if you could push a button and live forever, would you push that button?
Probably not.
Me neither.
Do we have a chance to push it again, maybe 100 years later?
Well, the world would just get too crowded. I mean,
Right.
Yeah.
people.
I'm done now.
I'm
It's
ready
okay.
to, you know, I would like to think
We're finished.
maybe I would be ready for the next adventure, you know, so.
There's another thought there. I've thought about that question, and I see death in a very friendly way, in a sense. And that is, it gives us the absolute assurance that there is an end to human suffering. And anyone that has ever been put in a position of incarceration or being captive, being subjected to suffering, and had that imposed on them, can understand that assurance can be very, very comforting. I would never push that button.
Point. Thank you. That's a good point.
Angela, if I could, I think, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that makes talking about death difficult is that our society does not embrace the aging process. And so talking about death also involves the secondary talk in many circumstances about aging, and we just don't embrace that in our culture.
Right.
Some cultures do, but generally ours is just not one of them.
No,
So
it isn't, right?
it's hard to talk about those two things together because it's two things that we avoid
Mhm.
independently.
Right.
It's almost like aging is a disease in and of itself, when in reality, it should be embraced as a beautiful process, because you learn things in each phase of your life. But Miranda, you're right. The society as a whole doesn't embrace that process. I was actually talking to somebody the other day who had the courage, if you will, to call someone out when they were given a hard time by a physician, or a physician said something about, well, you are 80.
Right.
And she's a Spitfire, and she in response said, well, last time I checked, my age is not a disease. And so
Awesome.
yeah, so I wasn't surprised, to say the least, but I definitely think that society doesn't embrace that aging process. And then you couple that with the fact that, like you said, Angela, aging is dying is almost an option. I think that it's never going to happen to me. It's never going to affect me. And then the fact that people don't have the appropriate tools to vocalize that conversation, or the right people, or the right opportunity to have that discussion. I think that also results in a lot of people just saying, oh, I'll deal with that later, or I'll deal with that later. And then later comes and they're just not prepared.
Absolutely.
Ism is alive and well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I just, I do want to, actually, this is like sort of our halfway point. So if you need to break for a refill, feel free, because we're going to kind of get into our portion here where I do have, Rachael is actually our special guest this evening. She is an elder law attorney with Applegate and Dillman Law Group. And so the portion of our planning guide here, the next portion, I sort of wanted to talk a little bit about how do we get our affairs in order, and some of these kind of practical things.
Good.
Yeah, so does anybody need a break, or are you okay if we kind of push on, or what are you thinking?
Got enough wine and chocolate here.
I'm afraid to eat my chocolate because I always get it all over my face when I eat. Dave's laughing because he knows it's true. It's every time, so it's with me by proxy. So, all right, well, yes, Rachael, are there, like, what are some of the most common questions that you get from your clients who are trying to plan for end of life, or what are some of the most common situations that you come across, and how do you help your clients?
Right. So I'm just going to start by introducing myself just briefly. As Angela mentioned, my name is attorney Rachael Rode, and I am the associate attorney at Applegate and Dillman Elder Law. And we do a lot of different things at the firm, from estate planning, so getting your advance directives in place and helping you plan for how you might pay for care, so that could encompass a trust, something along those lines, to the Medicaid process, if you need that to help you pay for care, or getting you on VA benefits to assist you in paying for that care. We also cover guardianship and probate work, which if you or a loved one didn't have the opportunity to get those advance directives in place and need someone to help them make decisions that would most likely lead you down the path of guardianship. And then after one has passed, oftentimes they need assistance through the probate process. And so if you kind of put all of that under one umbrella, that entire journey of planning and aging and reevaluating and working through that process is kind of called life care planning. And so at our center and at our core, that is what we do, we're a life care planning firm. So we help you plan, and then we help you get the care that you need. So similar to Angela, we do serve in an advocacy role, just maybe more from the logistical side, whereas Angela is very much about the care and the emotions and that sort of side of things through the aging process. So most people, I think of elder law attorneys as old curmudgeons, or how could we not all be 1,000 years old? Because if you've guessed it, I am rather young for this business. However, as much as Angela has a story about how she got here, I too have one touched by loss and touched by my love for those I have lost that brought me here. So from December of 2016 through July of 2017, we lost 3 family members in my family. My cousin was 41 and he died of a massive heart attack. And 3 months later, my grandmother passed away. She was 94. And died from old age, had lived a wonderful life. And then 3.5 months later in July, my aunt, the mother of my cousin that had passed away, she had a massive brain aneurysm, and she also passed away. So I had been searching and I had been asking the questions, I'm in law school, what am I gonna do? Where am I gonna end up? And at the time, I had kind of narrowed it down to either criminal law or elder law, which I realize are very different things. And so it was these life events after each one of them had passed away. And we as a family were figuring out, what is our new normal? How do we grieve? How do we pick up those pieces? The one thing none of us had to worry about was their plan, because they had all taken the time to put together the end of stage life documents, if you will, or that plan for what they wanted a funeral to look like for them, or what their will was supposed to look like. And so even though we had to grieve and we had to find a new normal, we didn't have to pick up that one piece. And it was my light bulb moment, my aha moment, my God moment is what I call it. Whatever works for you. I knew in that moment that this is where I was supposed to be. So I literally started looking for any elder law attorney in the city of Indianapolis, and it led me to Applegate and Dillman. So that's kind of who I am and how I got here, which is yet another reason I'm so passionate about when Angela gave me the opportunity. I said, absolutely, because I think what she does, we do, just on a different side of things.
Right.
So.
She knows the law. I do a lot of research on the law, but I would never give legal advice. I'm
right.
I know bits and pieces, but I
like to call yours the interesting tidbits that may not get dealt with very often, because we were talking about a couple things the other night that with respect to funerals that I wasn't aware of, because we don't often deal with that niche immediately following death. It's usually they come to us in a probate need a month or so after a person has passed, and to get that taken care of. So you asked me, what are some of the most common questions we get from clients? And because we serve such a wide range, those questions vary, but I would say the biggest one is, how can I protect my assets and plan for my children's future, or my future? Some of them don't have kids, but they want to make sure that their money is protected and that they're going to get the care that they need. So that's probably one of the biggest ones. We also get a lot of questions if folks have kind of lost the capacity to make those decisions and it's their kids that have come to us. They're like, how can I best help mom and dad or aunt and uncle or whomever the relationship is with? They need a level of care that I can no longer provide. How can I help? Which oftentimes leads us down the guardianship route. So we kind of look at it holistically. What are you trying to accomplish? and then we work backwards, if that kind of makes sense. The one thing that we almost always recommend, regardless of age, goals, any of the above, is a set of documents that we call advanced directives. These documents include things like your powers of attorney for both finances and healthcare, a living will, which in the time of Corona has even evolved in and of itself. So for those of you that may not know, a living will kind of lays out what you want at the end of life, whether that be artificially supplied hydration and nutrition, or some combination of one or the other, or neither. But a lot of folks have been coming to us and saying, we have concerns about COVID and my end of life care if I were to get COVID and it were to put me in the hospital. So that is something that we have seen evolve in real time, like we had never seen it before. Obviously, end of life care is end of life care. And if they've made a designation, that's one thing, but never have we kind of changed what that form looks like. So that's changing and evolving in real time as we collectively learn more about COVID. Also in that grouping of documents, we include a funeral declaration, which I think kind of touches on something that Angela's going to cover a little bit later, but it gives folks the opportunity to think about, do they want to be cremated? Do they want to be buried? Do they want to be entombed? What are those desires? And then they can take it home with them and edit and change and add things. My story for this is that my mom had a really good friend who passed away when I was probably in about the 4th or 5th grade, but I'd grown up with this man. And so in the funeral parlor at his viewing, they were playing rock music, not the traditional harps and quiet violins. This was Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven steroids. It was fantastic. It was genuinely fantastic, awesome. which paid homage to him as much as it did kind of bring a smile to folks' faces. So every now and again, my mom will do the same thing. She's like, hey, play that at my funeral. And I'm like, you need to start writing these things down.
Yes, write it down. For the love of God.
Remember. So that funeral declaration kind of goes in there with that as well. So those documents together kind of ensure that you can get some help if you are no longer capable of making your own decisions, but it also speaks to folks about how you want to receive care as your situation and care needs change. So we recommend that to all folks, regardless of what they're trying to accomplish. And then depending on what their needs are. So if they come to us and say, hey, I don't have a lot of assets, and they already have direction. And when I say they already have direction, use the hypothetical of someone has a home and a bank account and the stuff they own, basically. So if they came to me in that situation and they're like, I don't have a lot of assets, but I've got, my bank knows, and there's a designation on that bank account to pay it to my nephew, Steve, when I die, that's taken care of. I don't need to help them with that because they had the wherewithal to give it direction.
You can do that.
Or they might want to give their house to their son, Kevin. Well, I can help them with that, whether it be if they're ready to give it to Kevin now, we can help them with that with a deed. Or if they want to give it to Kevin after they've passed away, a transfer on death deed would cover that. So that is a very small sect of what we do in terms of how do we plan for you and what you're trying to accomplish. Now, if you are wanting to apply for Medicaid or VA benefits, you're going to want to protect the assets that you have so that you can get eligible. And so for that, we would recommend a trust. Now, there's two main kinds of trusts. I know that this is a lot of information, so I'll kind of just give you a high level overview. But there's what's called a revocable trust, and that allows you to function pretty much like you are today, but it helps you avoid probate. So that helps you avoid that court process at the time that you pass. So that one wouldn't be great for protecting assets and getting you eligible, but it would be great for helping you avoid probate. But an irrevocable trust is a vehicle that allows you to get eligible for those long-term benefits. Now, Medicaid and VA each have their own set of requirements and eligibility check boxes that you have to go through. But this is a vehicle that allows you to, if you can do it early enough, protect the assets that you have worked your whole life for. Because every time we pull seniors or pull middle-aged folks that may have been recently diagnosed with some sort of an illness, they haven't worked their entire life up until that point to pay their entire life savings to a nursing home. They haven't worked there. Most people I know, not everybody, but most people I know worked every day to provide for themselves and their families. And if there's anything left over, they would much rather that go to their family than the nursing home. And I totally understand that. So we can help you protect some of those hard-earned assets in the long run and still get you eligible for those benefits, whether they be VA or Medicaid.
Very good to know.
Absolutely. And they're really nuanced and quite frankly, not stuff that we need to cover tonight, but it just, if I could recommend anything, take a minute to think about what are your goals, whether that be paying for care, protecting your assets, or telling your loved ones what you want done when you die. And maybe it's some combination of all of the above, but just start the wheels turning, because if you have those questions or you come up with thoughts about, well, what do I do about this? Odds are somebody such as ourselves can answer that question. But if you've started to think about what are my thoughts or what are my processes that I want to protect, we can help out with that as well. So, and I know that a lot of this sounds like it's geared toward older folks, but it's really not. Not just for them, I guess. They're not the only ones that get to have the fun, if you will. We recommend the earlier, the better. And if anybody's got kids, we would recommend you start now if you haven't already. So Angela mentioned is once you hit 18, it's like a magical age. I would agree, except most people don't start to think about it until they've had kids or gotten married or have one of those big life events. So that's been one of my goals lately, is anytime I see friends in my social group, whether it be from afar across the front lawn or on a Zoom such as this, is I kind of try to gently give that nudge. Hey, have you thought about a will? Or hey, have you thought about advanced directives?
You're that annoying friend like I am.
Yeah, they literally look at me and laugh, but I'm like, one of these days you're going to take me up on it. But in all seriousness, in our group of people, we call it getting hit by the proverbial bus. We also say this at our office. What happens if you get hit by that proverbial bus? Where does your house go? Who takes care of your kids? You just have so many things that you haven't put in a protected box that if you get hit by a bus tomorrow, how does somebody come in and take care of it and make sure that those loved ones that are left behind are still getting the care and the support that they need if you're no longer there? So as much as we are an elder law firm, it's really not just about assisting folks who are elderly. I like to look at it as you transition into a new phase of life, whether that be married life or parenthood or retirement or end of life, whatever that transition is, we are here to help. And so at our core, that's really what we are. Now, a lot of folks wait until they're mid-50s before they start thinking about putting their plan together. But we would recommend, obviously, much as Angela has also, that you start early. And I believe Barb was the one that mentioned reevaluate that every year. I definitely think that that's a huge piece of this puzzle, because somebody puts a will in place and they say, okay, I've done it. I'm done now. Well, no. At minimum, please look at this every 3 years. But if you can do it every year to see what's changed, or is this the right vehicle, or did I win the lottery and I need to do something with it? Those are all good things to kind of reevaluate on a yearly basis.
Rachel, I have a question.
Yes,
Talk about the trust. I've had so many clients over the years in hospice who had Miller trusts.
Uh-huh.
What is a Miller trust in layman's terms?
So a Miller's trust is used when someone is on Medicaid, and if they receive more income in a given month than they are allowed to have by the Medicaid rules, that surplus goes into the Miller's trust. And then at the time of their passing, whatever is left that has not been used for their benefit, because once it's in there, it can be used for their benefit. If there are things that they need and qualify, whatever is left at the time of their passing then goes back to the FSSA or Medicaid. So it's best to keep as little in there as possible, but that's kind of the gist of how that works.
So that's where families spend that money for their care to
Right.
keep it paid down. And that's what I've heard so many times from families. And, you know, they've even been able to provide private duty care while they were living in a, you know, Medicaid waiver facility.
Absolutely.
Just for certain about all those ins and outs with it.
It's rather nuanced, quite frankly, and I will be the first to tell you that I don't know all of the nuances, but that's the general gist of kind of what that is for and how that works. So yeah, you're right. If somebody's in a Medicaid waiver facility or they're getting Medicaid waiver at home, they can use some of those extra dollars to bring in extra care, so that maybe they don't have to bump up to that next level of nursing home care.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So I know I threw a lot of information out there at once. So what questions did that generate right off the bat?
I got a question.
Of course.
Concerning the trust.
Uh-huh.
Now, you talked briefly about, yeah, we don't have a bunch of buildings. We don't have a bunch of real estate. We own none of the above. You know, we have our house. We have a little bit of money in the bank. We have our furniture, blah, blah, cars.
Right.
Was the trust good for something like that? Or is it for somebody who's got a lot of assets or what? I mean, of course, I don't want to give any more money to probate or Uncle Sugar,
Right.
You know.
Right. No, I understand that. So a revocable trust, you can look at it one of two ways. If your assets have direction, so if that means your house is under a transfer on death deed, so it will go somewhere or to someone when you pass. If your bank accounts have pay on death designations or a transfer on death designation, they will go somewhere when you pass. You can do something similar with if you have any investments, make sure your beneficiary designations are up to date and current. Vehicles, they're not super expensive. They're not super costly in terms of where my assets stack up.
Sure.
So where I'm going with this in a long-winded way to answer your question is each state has requirements for thresholds to need probate. So I know I'm in Indiana, and so if someone passes away and they have assets held in their individual name, so if I die and I have more than $50,000 in my own name, so that could be cash, that could be gold bars, that could be electronics, that could be Bitcoin, however you keep your money. If it's in your individual name and it's over $50,000 in the state of Indiana, it kicks you into that probate process. But if you have assets that have direction, then they don't have to go through probate. They circumvent that process. So a trust is a vehicle to allow you to circumvent probate to a degree, because you put all your things in this vehicle called a trust, and then it doesn't get counted in the probate asset bucket.
Okay.
So yes, if you have enough, it doesn't have to be for millionaires by any stretch of the means. We did a trust not too long ago for family friends of ours that had a home, and they had an estate, an investment account. And even though they had beneficiaries on that, they did an extra layer of planning and made their backup beneficiaries the trust, just in case those beneficiaries you've designated are no longer living. Because I know that the odds of all of that happening are slim, but at the same time, you want to have that plan so that if something happens and the folks that you weren't able to, yeah, like a backup.
Yeah, right. Okay, I hear you.
Yeah. So
Gotta have a backup for your backup for your backup.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So
That makes sense.
without specifics, I can't necessarily say, yes, you're in need of a trust versus no, you're not. But trusts aren't just for millionaires. Let's say that.
All
Does
right.
that kind of answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
very much so.
All right.
The backup did it. Yeah.
Backups.
My family lives in Ohio. That's
Okay.
my dad down there. So is it? I know you can't really speak to Ohio law, but I'm assuming it's got to be somewhat similar. Like
Most states are
Different, different numbers, but
right. Most states are very similar in that aspect. They just get to pick a number, and that's
pick
what
a number. I know it's kind of how it, kind of like how it seems to go.
Right. So something else I did kind of want to touch on is I don't know if these two processes are super familiar to either any of you, but it's the guardianship and probate process. So if you guys or a loved one may have missed that window to be able to sign legal documents and put those documents in place, they may come to a time where they need help and they can no longer make good decisions for themselves. Maybe they're suffering with dementia and they don't have that capacity to know what's best for them, their health, and their money. So in that case, if they didn't have any of these documents in place, a guardianship would need to be applied for with the local court system. And so a loved one, usually depending on the age of the person needing this assistance, it's oftentimes an adult child that is coming to me and applying for guardianship. Now, we do have a couple cases where children are in need of a guardian for one reason or another. Either they have lost their parents and a grandparent is stepping in to serve in that guardian role, or a parent may still be living, but not the best fit situation. A guardian can oftentimes step in there as well. But the day-to-day way I see it is an elderly person or an aging person needing assistance with their day-to-day lives. And then a loving family member comes in and applies to get them that assistance. And then once you've been approved as guardian, you serve very similarly to the way that individual would have functioned by themselves. So you make decisions about their finances, where they shall live, the care they're going to receive, all of those things. And then there's a checks and balances on that. So you have to account to the court for what you're doing, so that they know that the person's getting the best care and this person that is in place as guardian isn't going to abscond with their finances and with their funds. So it's kind of a checks and balances system. And then the other side of what I do on a pretty day-to-day basis is that probate process. So if you pass away and you have more than $50,000 in assets in your individual name in the state of Indiana, the probate process can be triggered. And if you left a will, you may have designated a person to serve as your personal representative, or more commonly known as your executor. And then that person would work with the courts and gather all of your assets up and pass them out according to the direction that you left in your will. So I don't want you to think that just because you have to end up in probate that you shouldn't have made a plan or shouldn't have left direction, because otherwise, if you die without some sort of a vehicle to give direction to your assets, then the statutes put in place by the state of Indiana kind of kick in, and they are the ones that decide how your assets are to be passed out. So that's kind of an overview of the probate process. Did somebody have a more specific question, or did that kind of, I know because somebody had posted, I thought in the chat.
I think there's a question about applying for Medicaid.
Yes, but is that
already answered?
I don't know that we've covered that completely, but the one about explaining the probate process a little bit further, Sarah had that question. Did I answer what you were looking for?
I think so. I just have not really understood exactly what that process is like and whether or not everybody has to go through it, or it sounds like not is the answer. So
right. So the short answer is, if your assets have direction and don't total more than $50,000 in countable probate assets, then no, you don't have to go through that process. So say, for example, in my earlier example, I used somebody that had a house and a bank account, and then basically their physical items or their stuff in their home. If the house had a transfer on death deed on it and the bank account had a pay on death designation, the only assets that would be countable to get them into probate court would be their stuff. So if the items in their home or their vehicles come to a total of $50,000, which for most individual normal people does not, I don't know about all of you, but all of the things in my home together at brand new quality don't equal $50,000. So that wouldn't trigger the need for probate. So that's kind of, not everyone needs probate is the short answer to your question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then I thought we had another one. Yep.
Yeah, that was me, I think.
Okay.
So the spend down / Medicaid Miller's Trust thing is a little discombobulating. So I was thinking that even if a person, like, I don't know, I'm thinking of somebody that I've worked with where they have disability, but maybe they're not leaving their house because we're in a pandemic. So they're not spending much money. So over time, they're paying their necessary bills, but their bank account is growing because they're just not spending the money that they have. So then for folks who wind up, seemingly, if they're over the $2,000 individual income limit for Medicaid with your assets, if they don't have a Miller's Trust in place, the spend down process is something that's still a bit of a mystery to me. I feel like you have to spend a certain amount in before you can actually use the benefit, but I wondered if you knew much about that.
So I think I understand what your question, I guess in your example, I should clarify, is the person already on Medicaid or are they on like Medicaid waiver?
They are applying for the Medicaid waiver.
Okay, so they're in process. So yeah, so if they have that, once they're on, they have that $2,000 a month income requirement, then that surplus, if there is any surplus from their monthly income, would go into that Miller's Trust. And then there is a list, which isn't all-knowing and magical, but there's a list of items and things that can be used for to assist in their care, so that is a way to spend down funds. So even if they're living in their home, there is a number of things that they can do to improve their care. So one of the examples we often give in our office is, if they are aging in place, is the home age in place friendly? And I know that might sound silly, but a lot of easy installs are things like grab bars in the bathroom or in the shower if they're not already in existence. Or in my grandparents' case, when they were still living, they had a grab bar to help them get up the one step from their family room into their like dining room. So there's a number of different things that can be used to spend that money on to help them better age in place. And that would obviously be kind of a way to help spend down some of those funds that may not have kind of been used to pay for their monthly bills. And now that they're not going as many places and doing as many things, that's an easy way to spend money eligibly. Does that kind of make sense?
It does. I think that the situation I ran into, unfortunately, the person didn't have a Miller's Trust yet. They had Medicaid, then they lost it because of that whole thing. And so getting them back on it was kind of that was the roadblock I most recently had run into with them, was, okay, so how do we even do this? But I didn't realize that you could find, like, I don't know, even without a Miller's Trust, could you still spend that money? Well, yeah, I could talk in circles here, but you did answer my question. Thank you.
Good.
I know the legal stuff is like so over my head, honestly, and that's why I'm like really, I keep these, these folks in my resource speed dial list, because, I know that these things can be so complicated, and it's definitely out of my realm. Stuff. So
it looks like we might have one more question here that I would like to touch on, and then I'll turn it over to you. In the chat, the question says, dealing with life transitions may cause surfacing of core issues for those who have experienced trauma. Your profession must encounter those core issues, and how do I respond? So I think this question came from Frank. So Frank, thank you very much for asking. So we see issues from folks who have suffered trauma in a number of different areas in our business. One of the big ways, or one of the big areas that I see it in my day-to-day work, is through the VA. We do serve veterans at our firm, both the guys who are trying to apply, or wives or spouses who are trying to apply for aid and attendance benefit, as well as those folks who are trying to apply for service-connected disability. So that's a direct way in my day-to-day work that I see folks who have suffered with trauma. And this might sound overly simplistic, but the best way I have found to kind of help them cope is to just listen. 9 times out of 10, that's really what they want, is whether it be the VA fellas or the family who has come to me who has just lost a loved one. A lot of times they just need somebody to talk to that's not in their family. They may have experienced something similar, but we're outside the family and we're a listening ear. So from that standpoint, that's one of the easiest ways we respond. And then we try to help them navigate the process with as much ease as possible, because a lot of times folks do come to us in crisis, whether that be they need to get on Medicaid and fast to pay for long-term care, or they just lost that loved one and now they have to navigate the probate process while grieving, or they're guys and gals that have served our country and have come home and are injured, or even if they weren't injured and they served their time and now they need assistance paying for care, we help them with that. So in addition to listening, we try to figure out how we can help them navigate the next phase, navigate the uncertainties, because I recognize a lot of what we do can be confusing. It can be very complex. And so making it as simple to understand and easy to navigate that next step is how I would say we try to best respond to those folks. Does that kind of answer your question, Frank?
Thank you.
You're very welcome. And I think most recently someone asked if I could share my contact information. I will most certainly share that here in the chat. But unless if anyone has any more immediate questions, I think I will turn that back over to Angela, because I just stole half an hour of her time.
No, it's okay. We're good on time. And thank you so much, Rachel. Really, really appreciate all of it. This has been so valuable. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for letting me share, because I genuinely do love what I do and who I work with. And so from that standpoint, I really appreciate you all taking the time to listen.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to add real quickly, kind of to tag on to the last things you were talking about with trauma, is right now we are seeing the Vietnam vets.
Absolutely.
And I was the point person for the agency I worked for 9 years, nearly 9 years at the VA. And we are seeing so many of the Vietnam vets who have a lot of trauma. And I went through the soul injury training, and Frank, that's a very valid question, because not only, vets, but people in general have a lot of trauma, and trauma that happens early in life that they don't have the time, or they just push through life and they don't deal with it until the end of their life, and when their life is limited. And I think, Rachel, you nailed on the head. It's listening. I've had two Vietnam vets share with me stories, and both times the spouses looked at me as I was leaving and said, my husband has never told me that before.
Wow.
And someone outside the family, as Rachel indicated, and to listen and not be judgmental.
Absolutely.
Both of them were Agent Orange type cancers. And the first time the wife said that to me, I was a little blown away. I went out and sat in my car and I cried, because I thought, why me? Why did he tell me and he's never told his wife? Even though I am the Vietnam age group of people, I'm the tail end of that. I'm 68 and knew quite a few people, several.
I'm sorry, Barb, what do you do?
I worked for a hospice agency for nearly 9 years, and
Are you a nurse?
I am not. Was an account liaison, and I am now an end-of-life doula. I went through the doula givers program, and I just opened my LLC, Graceful Passage.
Oh, okay.
Being able to take the part, and Angela mentioned this briefly, being able to take the part of hospice that I love, and the educating part and advanced care planning and the navigating and trying to reconcile families and resolve issues without the corporate pressures of numbers.
Yeah.
The nature of my job, I could have probably done until I was 80 years old. But things were really changing, and especially since COVID. And in the fall, I realized that I was probably going to say something I would regret. So I probably needed to put my retirement plan in place. So yeah, January 15th was my last day with the hospice agency.
Congratulations, Barb. I am so happy for you.
And again, and even doing this kind of work, I don't want to work 60 hours a week and the pressure of the corporate and the numbers. And with COVID, it just got nastier than it had ever been before. And because for those of you who don't know, Indiana is an open state. It is not a certificate of need state. And in central Indiana, there are about 40 hospices that serve the population. And it is extremely competitive.
Yes.
Very number driven. And I didn't do what I did for nearly 9 years because of numbers.
Right.
Mine was helping the families that I helped, and I averaged 200 a year. The numbers are what chased me out the door. I knew it was coming when I started the doula training back in February, and I had just turned 67 and worked on that through the year, but wasn't sure where, as Angela knows, it's hard to give up that regular paycheck and the benefits and turning loose of that to go out, on your own. It's a little bit what wakes you up in the middle of the night going, oh, what am I going to do? I'm not going to have that paycheck. It just kind of flinches. Yeah, in the fall, when things just the pressure for the numbers, and as I'm going to say something I regret, so I put my plan in place and exited on the 15th. But
Thank you, Barb.
Veterans, the veterans are a very special group, and we're seeing the Vietnam vets now.
Thank you. I'm thinking that Rachel, your comments about listening are very important, and I'm thinking that if some of these core issues can result in triggering addiction responses, for instance, or high anxiety, they're related to alcoholism, and I'm kind of thinking that there might be times when, as an attorney, you might want to refer someone to Barbara or Angela, because the need for listening skills and helping people to sort through those core issues and deal with the choices that they have leaves the legal area and goes into some other areas.
Very much so.
I recently, my wife and I, Barbara, both have had massages by Angela, and I found that it was really easy to talk and experience with the combination of touch and talk, it really changed the ability for me to express some things. And Angela, thank you. Barbara and I are both here, and we both appreciate you. And Barb, I am a Vietnam era vet, and we just I just saw a friend from where I live who is in the process of moving because he just doesn't have enough social contact to keep him centered and on track. 3-time wounded, carries shrapnel, has pain, medication issues, and companionship is not enough. It has to be informed companionship.
I like that. I'm going to use that. Thank you. Companionship. I'm writing that down. Thank you for your sweet comments to Frank.
Rachel,
Yes.
you're the only person I've ever known who spells her name AEL, but I have a cousin who does, or I have a niece who does
Well, thank
AEL, so I'll have to tell her.
Yeah, we're a rare breed, that's for sure. The best kind.
Well, it's about 7:40 now, and I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for our next special guest. We're going to get into sort of the topics surrounding body care and disposition, which basically means what would you want done with your body after you die. I am not only an end-of-life doula, but I'm also a home funeral guide and advocate, which is not for everybody. But one of my main things that I do like to mention is that it is, no matter what you choose for what you want done with your body, whether you want a traditional burial and embalming, if you want cremation or some form of green cremation, which is what we're going to talk about today, that it is perfectly legal and safe to keep your loved one's body at home for some time. And so I just encourage families that when the death does occur, to spend plenty of time with the body before having the funeral home come and take your loved one away. I think that death requires some level of processing to really integrate what has happened. And when we do that for ourselves, I think it can really positively impact sort of the trajectory of grief. It's something that needs to be planned for, which is why I encourage these pre-planning conversations. It's not something that is generally sprung on somebody to have a home funeral as an option. But if you have any questions about that, or if you're just wanting to know more about that, I do want, please contact me about that. But as far as burial options, traditional versus green burials and those sort of things, I want to introduce our special guest, Sam Sieber. And Sam, I apologize, I don't know your title with Bioresponse Solutions, but I know you are directly affiliated through family of the organization. And so I'll kind of let you introduce yourself. And today, Sam is going to actually introduce us to the option of Aquamation, which is also known as water cremation or fireless cremation. It goes by many names. I'm going to kind of let Sam take it away and introduce yourself and tell us about this really cool option.
Thank you. So I'm a biologist by degree, and this is my family's company. We're an Indiana company. We're in Danville. I live in Lafayette, but my dad and my brother, we formed this company in 2006, and we sell equipment all over the world. So we're an equipment manufacturer, but we're also, I guess, the educators for the aftercare profession and trying to introduce ultimately families to this newer option. And so I think I'll start with a little bit of, can I share my screen?
Yeah, let me figure out how to, do you have the button to do that already?
I do, and it says that you disabled screen sharing, so I can survive without it. And while you look for that, I'll kind of tell my own personal story. My dad stumbled into this technology about 27 years ago, and it's an alternative to traditional cremation. It's a water-based process, and it uses a solution in 95% water and 5% alkali to basically perform the cremation. Most common questions that people, I think that's going to work.
Okay, cool.
Most common questions that people have are, why would somebody want to do this? And what do you have left? And so very, very similar to flame cremation. The family's gonna get an urn with ashes back, and they look pretty similar. Anything that you can do with cremation ashes, you can do with the ashes from this alternative process. And so that is something that I wanted to talk about a little bit too, is there's a lot of reasons that people are choosing cremation. And I feel like it was a bit of a mystery in the profession for a while, because people thought it was just maybe financially motivated reasons. But I think that the aftercare profession is realizing now that it's so personal what you choose in the end of life. And, you know, a lot of times it comes down to, I look at my mother-in-law, she still visits in Camden, Indiana, the family cemetery, and they still take flowers out there on the holidays and visit the gravesite. And so I would imagine, it's interesting, we probably need to have the conversation with her. I think she just turned 67, but I would imagine she's probably going to want to be buried in that cemetery with the rest of her family. You know, I have a sister that really likes the idea of green burial for various reasons, and she happens to live in an area that's about 3 miles from a green burial grounds. It's absolutely beautiful in Kentucky. And I think a lot of families that choose cremation or aquamation, there's a variety of reasons, but they may have something they want to do with the ashes. They may want to take the ashes home. A lot of families inter them in a cemetery as well, if there's a family plot or a cemetery that, you know, is nearby that they want to do that. Now that I have screen sharing. So aquamationinfo.com, is everyone able to see that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to connect you with a resource if you're interested in learning more about this, and then maybe answer some questions just in the interest of time. This is the website for my company, and we walk through explaining the basics of this process. It's 1/10 of the carbon footprint of flame cremation. There's no air emissions, and it doesn't rely on fossil fuels. So it's 100% electric. As we continue into the future and come up with cleaner forms of electricity through wind and solar and hydro, any of those benefits as we move forward will be realized with this technology, because it doesn't need any fossil fuels. And this is a huge reason for the foundation of this technology. But what we're really finding out is that families seem to have a preference one way or another. If they're offered traditional cremation or they're offered this, it's usually not the eco side of things that guides people. It's more of just a personal preference of, you know, for some people, flame and fire is actually sacred and considered a cleansing. And so there's some religions or cultures where flame cremation is something that they're going to be more drawn to. For other people, they prefer, you know, they have an aversion to the traditional cremation, and they may want this water-based process instead. So it's very personal. We have a lot of firefighters who travel quite a long distance in order to have access to this option or to choose this option. And so it's very personal. And this website is really designed to show you, answer some basic questions about the process. You know, there's a frequently asked questions portion. You know, one question is, if it uses water, how can it be green? And or if it uses a chemical, how can it be green? And one way to assess where something fits in environmentally is with something called a life cycle assessment. And that's where they look at every aspect of a cradle to grave approach of the environmental impact of a technology. So Aquamation uses a chemical, it uses water, it does use electricity, And then there's a processed water at the end of the cycle that goes through a recycling process. So all of these things have an environmental impact. And one of the ways a life cycle assessment would help someone figure out where that fits in among other options. But when I was talking to Angela, I think something interesting is we don't have to choose the greenest option. It's a very personal choice, and there's a lot of personal feelings and desires that go into choosing, figuring out what seems to be a really good fit for, your end of life body care. And for some people, environmental impact might be a big thing. For others, it might not. I don't drive a Prius. I live on a farm. I have a truck. I get mulch, we haul stuff. And so I definitely don't drive the greenest car, and you don't have to have the greenest aftercare disposition, but I do think that making sure that the options is a good thing. My grandparents grew up in Speedway, and they passed away in 2013, 24 hours apart, unrelated, at two different hospitals in Indianapolis. Grandma went in for a virus, and Grandpa had a heart attack, like his fifth in his life. And so they were in two different wards. And this kind of changed the trajectory of my life and what I go and give presentations about now, because it was 2 weeks in and out of hospitals. The family wasn't on really good terms leading up to, the family was kind of torn leading up to the time in the hospital. And so it was very tense. And my grandma and grandpa would have loved to, they followed my dad in 27 years of his career with this technology and this option. And they would have loved to have chosen this. Indiana at the time was not an approved state for it. And one thing that, and it still isn't actually, and I'll pull up the map to kind of show you what the situation is with that. But one thing that we didn't know is that they could have chosen it because right over the state border in Illinois, of all people who should have known this, it should have been me. There's in South Holland, Illinois, we could have actually worked with a funeral home here to have that service provided for them in Illinois. But in the middle of 2 weeks of the worst 2 weeks of my life, nobody was thinking about that. And we hadn't really pre-planned for that. My grandparents had burial plots, and they actually ended up being cremated. But that was something that they kind of decided on their own. And their kids really weren't involved in that planning process. So even though they had pre-planned, it still was a difficult time. It was pretty unexpected. They were both in good health, and then all of a sudden, they were both in the hospital. So we expected to have them around for another 10 years or so at least. So let's see. I guess, are there any questions? I kind of did a little bit of a hack job here.
No, it's okay. Can you just what is the process like when the body goes into the machine? Like, what happens?
Right. So the body, would anyone like to see what one of these things look like, or is that that might be a little TMI?
I've actually watched a couple YouTube videos on it.
Okay.
Go for it.
It's intimidating looking. Let's see if I can show one of these.
I personally don't think it looks that intimidating. When my dog died before Christmas, I actually did a witness cremation for my own dog, which just means you get to push the button that starts the cremation machine, the retort. It was hotter than heck in that room. The machines are loud. It wasn't a super calming environment, but I get the sense from what I've seen in videos of Aquamation that it's not like that. So I don't know. I
There's
think it actually is a
so
little
many
bit.
gadgets on these machines. There's some gadgets, and it's just, as far as the process, it's just water in, and then it circulates gently, and then water out. But it takes a lot of gadgetry to monitor the temperature, and basically we do it in a very, very controlled environment. And so they look a lot different than what a flame crematory looks like, which a flame crematory is a little bit bigger and looks more box-like. And then inside of that is a smaller chamber. This kind of just shows you the whole size of it, just looking from the outside of it. So let's see if I can. Oh, wow.
Dodie,
I don't know how to drive this. I don't know. I'm on Pinterest. So here's what the machine looks like. But essentially what happens is the deceased is placed into the system, and then it fills with a solution of 95% water and 5% alkali. And alkali has a very high pH, so it's the chemical opposite of acid. And then it's a very slow flow of water. So if you would think of a creek or a stream, it's just a very slow flow of water. And if you compare it to cremation, it's kind of slow, but if you compare it to burial in the ground, it's impressively fast. So it takes about 6 to 8 hours. And essentially what you're left with at the end are, bone is our largest, is an organ. So it looks like bone, but we call it bone shadows. It's just the inorganic minerals that are left at the end. So anything organic is broken down into the most basic building blocks. So sugars, amino acids, and nutrients. There's no DNA or RNA left.
Wow.
And then there's the minerals of the bone. And I think what confuses some people sometimes is, I think people think after a traditional cremation that uses fire and combustion, I think people typically think that the ash is like what I would get out of my wood stove, but it's actually not. It's a little bit of ash like that, but it's actually the minerals that made up your bones. And so sometimes people have an urn that's been on the shelf for a long time, but they've never actually opened it or looked in it. And when they do, they don't know what to expect, or, they don't know what that might look like. And so here, if you're able to see this, the color of ashes, it varies. You get a little bit more left with the Aquamation. You're going to get a little bit more because it's just slower and more gentle to those mineral remains. But the ashes are going to be somewhere between a white and a tan color. And with flame cremation, they're somewhere between a white and a gray color. So very similar. As for what you can do with ashes, there's so many things that you can do, but there's one I wanted to share this, and I don't have anything to do with this other than I just really love it because it's going to help me solve a problem with my dad wants some of his ashes spread at Turkey Run, a state park in Indiana, and then Lake Monroe, Catfish Cove is where we've always gone boating. And so there's something called parting stone where you can take the ashes and have it basically formed into a stone that feels really nice. And you get several stones returned to you in a little pouch. And then you can, as you do different things, take a stone on vacation with you. If there's right now, my cousin who passed away at the age of 26, my aunt and uncle, every time they travel somewhere, they take one of these stones. And so I really like that. I also like if you drop it in the water, it goes to the bottom of the lake, you know, conceivably right where you dropped it. You can leave a stone by a tree. And I like scattering ashes as well, but I think that this is probably one of the neatest things that's come out in the last few years are these stones.
It's really beautiful. I know we're like right at 8 o'clock. This time like seriously flew by. There are a couple of questions for Sam that, but if you have to go, totally understand. And if you have to jump off, that's okay. I'll post this at some point. I'll share this with everyone. But if you're able to stay on, just so she can answer these couple of questions, you're welcome to stay if that's okay with you guys. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with continuing. So I know
I'm all yours. If so I'll be able to stay.
Okay, we won't keep you all night, but the one question is, what's the cost comparison to traditional cremation?
Good question. It's similar. And so if someone were to ask me the cost of cremation, it just between here where I am in town and 10 miles down the road, it varies by provider. It depends on what's included, but I think probably in Indiana, you can get, you can have a cremation between $1,000 and $4,000, which is crazy, but it just depends on what services are included and also the provider. So this is similar to that. It's typically the same price. Sometimes a provider might have, for example, if they have a traditional cremation priced at $1,500, they might charge $2,000 for this. And then sometimes they charge a little bit less. So it really depends on the provider. It really depends on the provider.
What's the transport? So if you pass here and you're going to, did you say Southern Illinois?
Right. That's
so
a good, so
family responsible for that, I'm assuming?
No, so you'll work with whoever your local provider is. So it's a little tough. I can be contacted to connect, you know, to help somebody. If somebody was wanting that and wanted to contact me directly, I could, there's a few providers in Illinois and a couple of them are also licensed in Indiana. So they can actually come here and provide, you know, the removal services from the care facility or from the hospital, or you can work with a local funeral home here and they'll take care of everything for you. Yeah. And it's a lot of times the funeral home doesn't know that that's an option. So you have to tell them that this is what you want. I'm hoping that I'll be able to get the law changed here. There's a lot of people who want to provide this here, but it just takes time and we're a little bit slower here.
I'm writing our representatives. I started last week. I got a inspiration from a group that I just joined on kind of where to start and where to begin. So I've never done this before. Writing senators and representatives is like weird, but I'm trying to get it reintroduced because it was so close to being passed here in Indiana. And when I learned of how it got turned down was by basically one senator's very misinformed testimony against it, and he had direct ties into the casket making business.
He is a casket maker.
He's a casket maker. So he would have been directly negatively impacted if that law would have been, if it would have been approved here in Indiana, because he possibly would have seen a loss in his profits. And it's like it's just, so he's no longer in office. And so now that somebody else is in that place, I'm writing him and saying, hey, can we get this reintroduced now? Because there's a lot of people that I think would like to know that this option exists. But I know your organization works all over the country and has been very successful in other parts of the country in offering it for, it's like legal in like 18 states for human disposition.
22 right? Now.
22
and there's another 15 that are going to fall in really soon.
Very cool.
It's just changing a law.
To get on it.
Changing a law is it's a problem because there's so many to be important enough to be heard and considered. is an issue. And sometimes it's just a bad legislative year where there's a lot more really pressing issues. And so I'm curious to see where all the bills that were supposed to go through this year go, because I think a lot of legislation is being forced through to deal with the pandemic.
Yeah.
And it just might not happen this time.
Yeah.
But Indiana, after my grandparents, I had that fiery energy, and I spent about a year on it. And we had, I was pretty impressed actually by, people always joke about our representatives, sitting in for a few hours and not doing their work, but they were here at 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night, learning about it. A health committee came in and learned about it. And actually my old physics teacher from my high school has put the bill on a couple times to try to get it to go through, so we're working on it, but any support helps.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, where does the water go? So obviously a majority of the mixture is water, and then the alkaline, what happens when the process is completed?
So typically that is released down the drain, and it goes to the local sanitation department for recycling. So it'll be cleansed and then recycled. That's typically what's done. There are places, and I really, really love this, and this is something I'm working on, but it just takes time. First, we have to get it approved, and then we have to work through the proper channels to do this. But there are places like in Portland and Denver that are collecting it and taking it to tree farms and using it to rehabilitate land, or going directly onto a tree, which is my dream. And it's just, especially if you look at a very conservative state like Indiana, it's such a hurdle to get it just approved. And then, and I don't mean conservative politically, just Indiana's a little bit slower in terms of just in funeral law, actually, and being progressive, in passing laws quickly and meeting consumer needs. We're just a little bit slower in Indiana than some other places, but there's definitely worse than us. Like Pennsylvania, where you can't have food in a funeral home, which is insane to me. It goes along with getting families together,
Absolutely, yeah, that's very strange.
Yeah, so it either goes down the drain to the wastewater treatment plant, or hopefully in the future goes directly, onto land or trees or something more direct like that. But
it's non-toxic. They're actually beneficial. So it's
right.
It's like, not only is it better for the environment because you're decreasing ecological impact, but you're actually like giving back to the planet.
Right, and it goes on to be recycled, even if it goes down the drain. It goes on to be recycled ultimately on land. But I think one of the most interesting things about the technology, if there's chemotherapy drugs in a body, they're destroyed. A body can still be embalmed. So if a family wants that as part of their, services, embalming chemicals are destroyed by the process. Drugs in the body are destroyed by the process. And then any metal implants that are in the body are still there and are beautiful and pristine, and they get recycled to make new implants. And that's actually where a huge credit on the environmental impact comes from. And this is true with flame cremation as well. Those metals that are precious metals that are used to make our implants in our body get to stay in the cycle of, in the usage loop. They get to go be refined and then used again to make more metal implants. Kind of TMI on that, but I think it's
really cool.
It's amazing.
That's really cool.
Titanium is the 6th most abundant element on our planet, but it is a massive environmental impact to actually get to the point where we can make medical implants with it. So most of the titanium used for implants in North America come from other continents. And so if you think of mining that metal, getting it here, refining it, if we can actually take the metals that already exist and are already purified and put them back in the usage loop. It's really a really nice way to recycle.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm. And pets are getting implants too. So, and there are providers for pets. Pets don't have the same legal hurdles. There's providers for pets in Indiana, Terre Haute, Evansville. Actually, pets are, I'll show you something that I don't really show.
I need to share it with you here.
Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. There you go.
So I don't ever really show anybody this, but I thought you might. Here's the locations of systems for, this is where we have kind of where the human technology is right now. Australia, South Africa, just put the first one in the Netherlands, a lot in the US, a lot, quite a few in Canada. And so it's not sticking to just the greeny states. And then for pets, it's just
It's
a lot of places.
everywhere.
It's everywhere. And so usually you can find a pet provider somewhere. Yeah, I thought that might be, it's slow. There's a lot more crematories than there are Aquamation facilities.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think now, I mean, and I don't want this to sound morbid. I mean, we've been talking about death all night, so I don't know why I'm worried about it now. But I don't know. And I guess we haven't had the high levels of the need for cremation, but I think of places like LA right now that is so overwhelmed with the number of deaths from COVID, where the cremations are so backed up. It's like if we had another alternative to do that in a way that, I mean, their air quality is being affected. It's so bad there.
That's right. And it's funny, I've had a system there for 1 year and 3 months, and they're not they're not letting it run right now because of a 1-page application that they needed a sentence change on it. It's so silly. You see the national news with their air quality suffering, which flame cremation doesn't, when you run them how they're supposed to be run, they're really, I mean, it really does have a low environmental impact. We have less, but cremation is pretty eco-friendly. And they, there's not, the emissions are very controlled, but right now they're having to run the equipment a lot differently than what is for, the best environmental control. So yeah, it's pretty sad. I definitely felt like the most morbid topic tonight. And I laughed when Rachel, you said that you tell your friends, you're that person. I thought, well, boy, we should. I always go to social events, like, don't be weird.
Hey, you guys are my kind of people. So like, can we be friends?
But people always ask about it. I don't even bring it up, and people always end up asking about it because I feel like sometimes it takes a glass of wine or two for people to feel like they can ask about these things, and they have so many questions. And I just don't think that in other situations, it's an open topic for people. So I think this was a really pleasant surprise, and I really enjoyed getting to know everybody a little bit.
Thank you.
When I talked to Angela
Thank you.
about the
Thanks
process.
everyone for coming. I know we went a little over. I'm gonna look forward to doing more events similar to this around just some different topics in the future. But if you, Sam, can you put your contact information in the chat box before I end the call? And yeah, and I guess before we go, we can all cheers the screen.
I've been doing coffee. I have to drive home.
Whatever you got, it's fine. So thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Zevia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Decaf Zevia.
All right. So
It was nice meeting everybody.
Nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you
Very
as
nice.
well. Okay, I haven't seen it yet, Sam.
Yeah, Sam, your contact information still isn't in there.
Yeah.
Oh, I just did it. Oh, I direct messaged Frank.
Okay.
Sorry, Frank.
Oh, he has it.
Angela, we'll talk more about that Aquamation. I think that's what we're talking about.